So I've been wanting to talk about tank. Tank is in an awful state, and all advice and all coaching on tank essentially falls in the gambit of just do the things better. It's essentially like if you have Ramatra coaching, what they'll say is you do the vortex better, you put the shield better, they'll tell you wasting cooldowns, but they'll never get to the fundamentals. If you do like the Malga coaching, they'll tell you where to stomp, etc., but they'll never get to the fundamentals. If you talk about Ryan, they'll tell you to keep your health high and trade, which is always correct. The default advice is to keep your health high, don't poke as much, chill out, trade for specific picks onto the backline, try and access the backline, try and get kills into the backline. And that's always correct. It's always gonna be correct to tell people to do this. But there's like extra layers on this, and there's a whole like undersurface of problems that people just don't talk about. So I wanted today to talk about like not just tanking, but like what the good things in terms of tanking are. The job of tank is as follows. Your job is to increase the chance of generating an advantage that will win the game. That's your job. It's not too confusing. That's all of your role. You have to just increase the chance of generating an advantage to win the game. Now that can be a vortex in the backline, that can be a shield to like allow people into space, that can be punching the enemy team's DPS's face in or the support's face in. It can be a bunch of things. But essentially, this gets really complicated really fast when you actually start passing it down. And personally, to me, I feel like this Overwatch 2 scenario of increasing the chance of generating an advantage is a much more boring kind of like landscape than the Overwatch 1 design. That's my personal opinion. But the general idea is that you are incentivized to stagnate and not press buttons. That is what is good in the video game at the moment. The simplest case is really easy with tank. Okay, the simplest case is easy, and we'll go back to the whiteboard when we need it. Essentially, once you have a numbers advantage and you're stable, you should run down the enemy team and kill them. Very simple. That's easy. Everyone knows that. But as it gets more complicated, it gets a lot more weird. First off, doing nothing very often vastly increases your chance of generating an advantage. Second off, backing off and giving space can completely increase your chance of generating an advantage. And trading your entire health bar and just trading with the enemy backline can do that as well. So really, the topic is like push/pull/hold. When would you do either? What's really important? Why would we want to do either of these things? That's what tanking is. And I do feel like, as I said, people when they coach tanking don't really talk about it. What they do is they talk about the specific things that create a good SR disparity for you right now, which kind of sucks because you don't get the good general knowledge kind of stuff. And I'm gonna move my camera slightly down. I feel like I'm a little low. There we go. So first off, let's talk about 6v6. What was good in 6v6 for tank to do, and why is it different in 5v5? In 6v6, it was always good to trade the backline because you had DM, you had bubble. These are use it or lose it abilities that apply to somebody else and essentially allows you to either reinforce their pressure or stabilize. Stabilize, cancel out the enemy team's pressure, or reinforce your own team's pressure. And now in 5v5, these abilities have been taken off of the off tank and put onto the initiator. So essentially, like, this person has a button that he can press in order to aggress. And when you do that, when you remove the cooldown structure from somebody else, essentially what happens is you remove the instability and the lack of control over whether you're aggressing. And when that happens, you have a problem. And the problem's pretty simple. The problem is you don't randomly get a Zarya bubble and have to aggress for 2 seconds. That's the issue. Do you know how you do slots in a casino, right? And how you design the slots and the gambling machines? What you do is you create a variable reward. You make it so that arbitrarily there is extra stuff coming at you that allows you to do more stuff. And that's kind of what tank was like. You go in with Reinhardt and you get no support whatsoever, and you die sometimes, but you go in with Reinhardt sometimes and you get a Zarya bubble and a DM, and you'd be able to do so much more because you've done it. I think that's really impactful and really interesting. Essentially, your health bar before, in 6v6, because you had the extra tank, was smaller and the health bar was more easily replenished, which is cool. We like the health bar being more easily replenished because that means we're more incentivized to do stuff. And there was no real downside to applying pressure, but now, yeah. Before it was like Orisa, Sigma, Roadhog, you play passive, wait to cancel out their pressure. Yeah, now even Sigma has kind of like some version of push and pull, right? Just some version of it. I do think that the bad tank experience from Overwatch 2 does, however, create a new level of strategic depth. Before, you weren't incentivized to ever push into the enemy team. And now if you push into the enemy team, you essentially have this call that you have to make in order to do it. Before it was always good, and now it's either good or holding's good or backing off is good. There's a lot more bad scenarios for pushing. And this is one of the reasons why I tell new tank players to just play Brawl and Sigma so you don't have to do it. Because right now, they are the characters that don't really interact with people. I mean, if you look at Brawl and Doomfist, the correct play is kind of to disrupt 90% of the time. You just throw a shitload of stuff at them, and then you'll just move them about, and you'll move them around. And every single time you do this, regardless of the state of the game, whether you're advantaged, whether you're disadvantaged, whether you're in neutral, whether you've got a good position, whether you've got an extra resources, like that sort of stuff, there's one catch-all answer. Whether they're Winston's jumping at you, whether they're pressuring you, there's one solution. You just go in, you go into their backline, you do a pressure cycle, and you cause enough disruption that it doesn't matter. That was kind of the default playstyle for Brawl in 6v6, and now it's not in 5v5, which is weird and different, and I don't think people enjoy it, but it does put on levels, right? You need to understand the game in order to be able to tell when pressuring is good. And the same on Sigma, like your poke phase was cheap, right? Like on the Brawl and the Doomfist, you've got a strong enough pressure cycle, and it doesn't cost you very much in order to do that pressure cycle. And on Sigma, you've got a very weak pressure cycle, and it costs nothing. So you always should more or less chill for the most part. Even like now, sometimes Sigma obviously does do the pressure cycles. The difference between like Dive and Brawl there is that Dive gets to get around the poke phase and stop being burned down. In Season 8, I really like playing tank. Yeah, and that's different to Season 9. And I do feel like Season 9 was one of those patches that really changed the game significantly, because the sustained reduction and the health increase made it so that you should be more decisive and use things in a big burst, and the general pokey stuff at mid-range was disincentivized. But they did it for a reason. They did it for, I'd say, an incorrect reason of characters like Orisa and Roadhog had infinite sustain and people didn't like that. I think that was an incorrect reason to do that, but that was a response to making it a little bit easier to kind of like to balance the role, because the role was massive guys that run over the entire enemy team, and one way of doing it is to make the character eventually be burned down. So like dive tanks get around the poke phase. They don't interact with the getting to the Brawl. That's the point of dive. The dive characters jump in at full health. The Brawl characters, if I can put a B, have to walk at the enemy team and get burned down the entire way. That's a real difference. In order to actually like visualize it, the best way to do it is to like rank the heroes based on the greediness to get to the Brawl phase and that sort of stuff. So I think we're gonna do that first. We're gonna do a quick ranking, because this is like the fundamentals of what you have to think about if you're picking a tank and you want to be able to play it in the comp. That's the fundamentals. So let's go for like at the skill floor. What is the ranking of the tanks in terms of how many resources they cost to get to the Brawl phase? Not in the Brawl phase, not hitting things, but to get there. And we have this kind of effect where it's, well, Reinhardt costs a lot, Orisa costs a lot, Junker Queen costs less because she's slim, I'd say Zarya costs a medium to higher amount, Mauga obviously costs loads, Ram costs loads, and you see this kind of thing where like there's a curve downwards, and Diva costs a fair amount, and Roadhog doesn't cost that much because he's got an infinite health anyway, and then you have the dive tanks at the bottom, and this is kind of how you are, which is cool, because this is how you visualize how costly it is in order for you to do something. And if you'll note that these characters are quite vulnerable to being counter-swapped, apart from the characters like Orisa that can just survive infinitely. These characters are mediumly vulnerable, and then like you've got a couple of outliers like Diva in there. Some of the characters have significant mitigation counter swaps like Anti and Discord. Some of the characters are specifically interactive with Sleep, but we'll talk about that later. But in terms of actually getting to the Brawl phase, if you stack damage onto these characters can't do anything because they're expensive. These are the characters that care about being shot. And you'll notice quite a lot of the counter-swapping meta is to do with preventing the character getting to the Brawl phase by just stacking damage onto them. You'll notice Torbjorn, you'll notice Reaper. And to be clear here, this isn't a effectiveness ranking. This is a whether you're able to get to the Brawl phase ranking. And, as we've already covered, in 5v5 there's a lot more incentives to kind of just fucking chill, right? And then, as we go up the ranks, right, so this is like at the skill floor. As we go up the ranks, what we do, and you can reopen this, which is very useful. As we're not at the skill floor, as we're at high level, you start coaching people. And Mauga becomes not about burning resources to get there. Mauga actually uses very little resources to get there. And Reinhardt uses kind of a medium amount of resources to get there. Do you know why? Because they've got charges. So they can close the distance without doing the poke phase. They choose not to do that, and they can just get to melee range. That's really cool. Winston also goes down significantly. D.Va goes down a bit. And yeah, I think for the most part, people just reduce. And you see that Orisa and Ram are the most expensive still, but they essentially are the characters that can survive in melee range. We can also look at, if we reopen this, we can look at the effectiveness in the Brawl phase and how expensive they are to Brawl. Okay, so like if we get there, how many more resources do we use by being there? And how good is it to give us more resources to be there? And you'll notice Ryan always wants to be full healed while he's there. Malgot always wants to be full healed while he's there, no matter what the skill distribution is. Same with Ram. Orisa's a little bit lower because she doesn't really care about how many resources she gets given. She doesn't do that much more pressure if she gets given more. And then Zarya's pretty high. Junker Queen's pretty medium because she only goes for a bit. Orisa and Zarya too. Do you think Orisa should be the most expensive? Zarya should be most expensive. I don't think Orisa's quite there. I think it might be there. And then we still have these down here, these expensive characters. Interestingly, Winston's a little bit more brawling because Winston actually requires a lot more resources or gets more from those resources when he's in melee range, right? Winston actually does quite a bit of brawling. D.Va's kind of like, D.Va gets more and is quite expensive. Zarya is very expensive. I'd say Zarya is quite expensive too. And Sigma demands nothing. I say Roadhog demands nothing. You have this kind of like distribution. So these are the things that really tell you how to play your character. If you're playing well at high level, this is how expensive you are to get there. And if you're playing well at any level, this is how expensive you are while you are there. And that's like, it's something you really do need to internalize, because you demanding resources from your team is bad. You shouldn't be doing it. It's bad because essentially for quite a lot of the time, you can be just as effective by doing nothing as you can doing something. Like there's the whole thing about Ramatra, where Ramatra's only job is to block. That is what he does. He doesn't like doing anything else. He just chills. So like, I don't think people talk about that enough, that fundamental resource thing, that like how demanding you are compared to like other characters. Me block, me hold space, me die, me stand behind corner, me no look at enemy. Yes, me occasionally put shield out in order to shoot the enemy a tiny bit and go back behind my corner, waiting for the poke solution to come through. Yes, blocking is boring. Yeah, blocking is boring. I agree. But the reason why blocking exists is a fundamental problem. And it's the fact that there is no addition and an uncertain resource that's being given to you by another person. There's no Zarya bubble to go in with that is a user or loser ability on a cooldown, that if you don't bubble and go in, you essentially like just don't have a Zarya bubble in play. And that's the genius behind Zarya's design. It incentivizes people to do the correct things. So like you have more resources behind you, you have a more greedy tank, and you have more ability to do stuff, even if that stuff is bad. Yeah, so it's a kind of idea that Brawl and Doomfist, the correct plays 90% of the time to disrupt. And if you have a strong pressure cycle and it costs less in the Brawl phase and getting to the Brawl phase, and on Sigma, the poke phase is very cheap, your Brawl phase is relatively cheap, so essentially you have a weak pressure cycle and you're not incentivized to do the aggressive stuff. What to do if you have Mercy Lucio actually? Play Roadhog or play something very fast and hope the poke solution comes in. That's the simple answer is, what are your DPS doing? You probably should play Roadhog or Ball. Roadhog or Ball. And that's what you say, Ball and Doomfist and Roadhog and Sigma. Obviously Sigma and Roadhog are fairly similar. Are characters that don't care as much about this kind of like stuff. How much does timing matter for the tanks that want more resources? And what is the timing? Okay, so the idea is like, so timing is this like early, middle, and late kind of thing. We're not going to talk about it for very long. But how does it matter for the tanks that want more resources? Well, the tanks that want more resources want to do it for a reason. Essentially, they're going to burn resources by doing something. If they go early and do pressure and it doesn't result in doing anything, we have this issue that your team's going to be healing you, and they're going to be healing you here, and they're going to be healing you here, because you have such a big health bar and it takes so long to re-heal you that essentially if you destabilize yourself early, you have real big issues, right? So if you destabilize yourself here, your DPS want to do something here and they essentially don't get any support during it. And that's one of the reasons why the game stagnated, because there's no incentive whatsoever to do stuff aggressively, and that sucks. That sucks. Like not being able to do an early pressure cycle and people capitalize off it. Always having to time at the peak here of the rest of your team's pressure or late in order to capitalize upon it. That's not really the idea of what a tank wants to do. And the only characters that get to do this are Brawl and Doomfist without demanding significant resources from their team that could otherwise be used somewhere else. And that is like, that's a controversial bit. That's why 5v5 is struggling as a concept. If you put a cooldown on somebody's kit and you put it and they use it here, they still demand so many more resources using their stuff quite a lot of the time, apart from just complete override abilities like Cardiac Overdrive that's so strong that there really is like no other answer to it. You can't aggress early. Doom and Balls are either turbo feeders or gods. Yeah, because they're uninteractive, right? They're uninteractive and they can actually kill. So they can go early and play old Overwatch, whereas now, for the most part, you can't if you're playing Zarya. If you're playing Zarya and you go early, you've just fed. If you're playing Ryan and you go early, you've just fed. There is no jostling for neutral position. There is no frontline resource trade, which is the sucky bit. Yeah, before you had like another off tank to stabilize the off angle as well. Now everything is basically just expensive. And I think this is a result of Season 9, not necessarily 5v5. But Season 9 did show all of the holes in the system. It made it a lot more obvious that there was a complete disincentive to actually aggress. And I think the simple fact is Blizzard made the Season 9 changes to the health totals just to prevent people complaining about Orisa and other characters not being killable, but that has just made the game worse. Just fundamentally worse in the same way that it was bad before. And that sucks. That really sucks. So if we're going to talk about this, like, you need to know what the throughput levels are. Throughput is DPS and support, then the disparity between DPS and support between you and the rest of your team. Throughput tells you what you can do, and it's like a resource in, resource out system. If you got like Mercy and Lifeweaver, right, that's, what is Mercy, 55, and Mercy's 52 healing per second, and neither of them put out any damage pressure, you have to know that. What if you have like Baptiste and Akiri? 70? I think Baptiste is 69 or 70 healing per second, and Kiriko's 76 off memory. It's somewhere around there. That's just a single target healing per second. And the idea is that there are some comps that you can do stuff in and some comps that you can't do stuff in. Lucio, Kiri, you have to be very... So that'll be 76, and that'll be 52. Can somebody fact check me? 52 healing per second with during amp for Lucio. So essentially, like, there's some characters that you essentially just don't do anything. You just hold your hands up. You're too expensive. If you do anything, you're going to demand so many resources that nobody else on your team's going to get anything. There is no spare healing to go around if you're Mercy Lifeweaver. So the moment you do anything early, you're going to demand everything. 65 during amp, I think. I need to look this up. I'm going to be correct about this, I promise. Yes! Why did Blizzard not tell these numbers in game? Because Blizzard are very bad at communicating anything in their game. So it's only for 3 seconds with the amp, but you need to know exactly what you have, because this 3 second is not a throughput, but it's a bursty resource you get. The reason why Mercy Lifeweaver isn't as bad as people think if it's played with a ball or with a character like Sigma or Roadhog or Doomfist, it's because they're health independent. And these types of resources, Mercy's Beam and Lifeweaver's support, they purposely made these numbers lower for a reason. And the reason is that they are more consistent, they are more reactive, and they heal DPS better. So if you demand these resources, you're going to have a lot more issues. Essentially, you can starve your entire team by demanding everything for them. And that's why quite a lot of the time, Plat Reinhardt stay in Plat, because you can't just be greedy. If you're always greedy and always selfish, without the context, you can run into a lot of problems. That's like the consistent resources. Then you have the bursty resources, and the bursty resources are more or less there to reinforce your pressure cycles. And you can assume that these will more or less be used. Amp, Suzu, Lamp, all of these things, all of these like really good, consistent, bursty resources, life grip, ults, all of this stuff reinforce the pressure cycle. So essentially, if you can be aggressive, you want to be aggressive, because being aggressive is generically good, but if you sap too many resources from the rest of your team, you got a massive problem. It's kind of the point. You need to know whether you have these bursty resources. If you don't know, you're gonna have more issues. And that's the other thing. If you demand Suzu, you demand Amp, you demand Lamp, then you can use all of that, but the rest of your team don't have it. And it's got better and better to not invest all of this stuff into the aggressive pressure cycle from, say, Reinhardt as time goes on. Though it is best just like a static thing to use these resources to allow aggression and take away the enemy team stuff. Counter swapping specifically isn't really a problem with the other stuff, but it's a problem with making the Brawl and poke phase too costly for the tank to be worth it. That's kind of the point. The counter swapping moves everything up in terms of that ranking that we did. It moves all of this upwards. It moves all of the characters into a higher category to the point where you essentially, it is better to not play the game and just AFK. And if you want a low rank, these are the characters more or less being counter swapped by damage. And obviously we can talk about specific sleep hack, that sort of stuff for those two. But for the most part, it's preventing these characters from playing the game. That's what people are unhappy about. That's the scary part about counter swapping, and I think that's what most people don't really get, like, straight up. So what do you do? Like, you're playing tank, what do you do? What scenarios are better to aggress? What scenarios aren't better to aggress? Like, you need to get a bit more specific, because I can't make a general thing about every character in the game. So tank is by far the most team-based role. If you don't information gather, you have no idea what's going on, you're always going to fail. So always get information, always look at your team before you do anything. You should be making informed choices. If you aren't making informed choices, you aren't making choices. That's how it works. I'm sorry, if you don't know what your team's doing, you'd no information, no play. Let's go to one-dimensional Overwatch, and we'll kind of like describe. So this is a straight King's Row, straight down the track resource trade. Do you win the resource war in a static one-dimensional trade? That's the question. Do you win the resource war? If you win the resource war, you may as well do the one-dimensional resource trade. Wait, weirdly enough, you may as well do the trade if you're going to win anyway. Oh, that's cool. So are we advantaged? If we're advantaged, and specifically if we're up players, because up players always pretty much wins a resource war in the straight one-dimensional trade, you know what? Use cover and cut damage while you're aggressing, but expect the kills. Go do your pressure and get the kills. The only ability that guarantees this resource being up without a significant, like, static resource advantage from being up in terms of players is Cardiac Overdrive at the moment, and that's why it's kind of like an override ability to the entire game. That's the kind of like hence the Malga stare down playstyle, because he wins a resource ward by default if people don't shut him down and counter swap here, etc, which is its own kettle of fish and that sort of stuff. So this is always a mode where if you're advantaged, you just press W. There's no, like, I am pressing W to drain the enemy team's resources. It is more, I am pressing W to get kills now. Before, it was like, I'm going to press W until they use this, and then I stop. Like, I can force Bubble, I can force Suzu, Lamp, that sort of stuff. Now, for the most part, into the enemy tank, you're just forcing stuff in order to kill them. Because, well, first off, you don't have enough extra stuff to do, like, maybe a dive into their backline with the Kiriko after you force the Suzu onto that Reinhardt, that sort of stuff. You just have, like, the one tank, and if your tank's playing Malga, you're staring at that Reinhardt. So what if you have a disadvantage on the straight resource trade? So the correct thing to do is to prepare to give space while applying light pressure. You need to back off. It's a very simple one. If you're advantaged, you aggress into them. If you're disadvantaged, this is the resource trade, you back off. And you just back off linearly. You give resources while you're trading with them, but you back off. But what if you're neutral on resources? Now, this is the thing that's changed since Overwatch 1, and this is the bad part of Overwatch 2. In a one-dimensional neutral fight, the correct thing to do without the additional volatile resources being given to you like Zarya, Bubble, and DM is to basically lightly trade resources and poke at the enemy team for an advantage whilst looking for, like, complementary pressure with others. You'll poke at them, maybe you'll throw a vortex at somebody out of position, maybe you put the shield out on Ram and just look at them for a little bit. But if you are neutral and Ram forms and runs at the enemy team, he's feeding. That's just how we are. That's where we are. There is no other give or take. It's too many resources from your team. The resources need to be used to cancel out the enemy team pressure. So in neutral, we're in waiting room. If we're in a one-dimensional fight, we're just in waiting room. And that sucks as a tank, but you do need to acknowledge it. If you are in neutral and you do not have an advantage, you should hold a position and chill until an advantage presents itself. If all other things are equal, you have no control over the game. Absolutely no control. Right? That's the 5v5 tank problem in a nutshell. But then we don't do 1D. So if you're in 3D Overwatch, I guess the question is, do you win the fight with or without a resource war of just like attrition in a static like 2-dimensional trade or 3-dimensional trade? If we stand here 10 seconds, are we getting more ahead or more behind on average? If we're on Hollywood second point and we are defending and we have the forward high ground position, are we getting a static resource advantage over the enemy team by staying? If that is true, we should be chilling. You should be chilling. You should chill. If you're disadvantaged, you actually just push out the enemy's angles and go really hard on the sides. Push out entirely. If you have an angular disadvantage, you should go straight for the side. So if we're aggressive, we should chill and relaxing. If we're disadvantaged, we should go. So for instance, flipping the Hollywood, if we're on a Hollywood high ground, we should chill. If we're attacking Hollywood high ground, we should go and burn all our resources in order to take the Hollywood high ground off them. But if we're neutral, it becomes a little bit more interesting because there are situations where we'll want to push in slightly and trade a little in order to gain space because our angles are going to develop more if we push forwards. So I'm thinking like Hollywood first point where you push through the choke. You can push through the choke and chill there for a second while angles develop around you. Or alternatively, instead of doing the neutral, sometimes you back up because if the enemy team aggress into you, your angular advantage gets better. Hollywood, high ground. Quite a lot of the time, when people aggress onto the high ground, you'll give up that high ground and you'll go over the bridge and you'll back up a little bit. There's loads of situations in the game like that where you'll give ground while trying to root your position because we know we win through attrition. So what we're thinking about is if we're advantaged, it's kind of the choke position on Anubis. That was a real big problem. We're much more likely to peel dependent on character, conserve resources, and wait for the enemy team's rotation. If we're disadvantaged, more like to push one side of the arc as hard as possible with like loads of resources and use resources to trade with that pressure. And if we're neutral in terms of angles, the question is, are your angles developing faster? Will pushing help you develop those angles? Do you want to give space to develop your angles and stuff like that? There's a lot to think about here, a lot of depth in the system. But the moment the enemy swaps and makes your poke and brawl phase more costly to your team, do you know what happens in this angular war? It becomes pretty much better to just chill in neutral. We have two sides, a resource war like a 1D Overwatch and a angular war like a 2D Overwatch. And the answer to counter swapping is always just chill. Yeah, the motorcycle did go vroom. It go vroom, pop, pop, pop as well. It's just relax, man. You don't do any pressure. You have no volatile resources. You should just chill. So like I spend a lot of time coaching people and it's a very hard thing to do. And that's why I always suggest people to essentially like go Brawl or go Sigma or go Doomfist, because this is complicated and this relies on a complete understanding of whether you are advantaged in terms of angles or resources. And that's fucking hard, man. Ramatra's a hard character to learn. It's difficult for a plat player to even get a basic grasp of this. And that's why I say don't even bother. Before, every tank was incentivized to aggress unless they were like had such a strong position they was like just beyond the pale. Now, like, we're thinking maybe like Ilios Central, like, I forgot the inside one on Ilios. Sorry, what Ilios? What's the map? The central one, the column in the middle. I don't know what I'm talking about. Anyway, that one. If you're on the pillar on the left side there, on the high ground in white, you probably should just chill and stay there. You probably should just chill. There's no reason to aggress, ever. Just chill. Especially if you're on a Brawl tank, going into the enemy team there is bad. You just AFK. That's your job. If it's more or less even, chill. I wasn't thinking that Oasis, no. Ilios Lighthouse, shut up, Ran. Ilios Lighthouse is a good example. And we can go through a few maps if you want and just show the different like scenarios, because that's probably like the easiest way to do it. Let's go into, just load into a couple of maps and just like show the Ramatra. Because Ramatra's like this, because he has this block dichotomy that incentivizes him to chill and not do anything. Li Zhang, yes. Not Gardens. It's a Li Zhang midpoint. I forgot what it is. God, I am washed. And of course, I don't have a Li Zhang on my list. Does anyone have a Li Zhang code they can send me? Doesn't matter. We're going to Oasis and show it. Control Center. Li Zhang Control Center. Yes. So it's the kind of thing where, like, if you're playing Ramatra and you get to here and you're fighting for this room, there's never a time where you want to aggress at all. You just want to chill. You just want to relax. There is no incentive to ever aggress. You should relax and wait for the poke solution to come through and for you to aggress. And you should try and conserve all resources while you're waiting. Before, you'd have a Zarya bubble on you and you aggress for a couple of seconds and you back up and there'd be this in-out resource trade, and then you just kind of chill. And then if we go to a different map, I can show you in every single scenario the correct option here is to poke, do a little bit of resource trade, maybe get a vortex on them, chill. Let them play into you, relax, wait, give up space. There's no forward and backward. There's no frontline resource trade whatsoever. There's no incentive to ever do that. And like, it's hard for me because it was a lot easier to understand Overwatch 1. It was a lot easier to understand Overwatch 1 because in Overwatch 1, you should aggress if you're on this corner. If you have a Zarya bubble, you should be pushing and then backing off. If you have a Ramatra form transfer or a vortex or a shield, you should maybe be shielding around the corner to poke a little bit. But realistically, just chill behind the corner. And it's so boring and it's so sad, and it's throwing vortex at the door when the round starts the right thing to do. I mean, sure, if you want the enemy supports to get ult charge, you can do that. I don't think you're going to kill anyone though. If there's no lethal pressure, all you're doing is trading ult charge NPC. Second. Well, this is a short game. Wait, you're not even on the right point. It's okay, I'll just go up to the right point. This is what I wanted. Yeah, so you roll out, you're on Reinhardt. Let's just go back to the characters. You're on Reinhardt, you're on Orisa, you're on Malga, you're on Ramatra, you're on Zarya, you're on Winston, you're on Diva, even you're on Junker Queen, even you're on Roadhog. Do you know what you should do when you get here and you go into here and you get here? If you can steal it, you should steal here. If you can't, you should stand here, do a general resource trade and wait. There's never a reason to aggress unless you have an angular advantage. Even if you do have an angular advantage, you know what you should do? You should chill. If you have a resource advantage and you're up one, you can aggress, but for the most part, relax. You're not doing anything. If you're on Malga, go off angle over here, cut the angle, shoot somebody. That's cool. But why would I ever aggress? I should just chill and wait for my team to, as I say, like, I need to move this over here. Wait for my team to, as I say, just go around that way. Extend the angle. And like, what control do you have in that? There's no like, I've outplayed the enemy tank, I've used less resources, etc. Unless you have so many more resources that you just press your face into them. Say they're on Winston, they roll out and you're on Malga. It's the objectively correct choice to press cardiac overdrive and press the W button. You hold left click, you hold right click, and that's it. There's no forcing a bubble with cardiac overdrive and having like the in-depth resource trade. There's no anything else. It's just sad. It's just sad. So like, that's where I'm at with Overwatch tanking at the moment. There's a load of depth here and there's a load of interesting situations to learn on how to be more aggressive or less aggressive. But every single time that I teach somebody to do it, do you know what I'm doing? I'm just teaching them to play in a more boring way because it's more optimal. I'm just telling them not to do anything because it's more optimal. And it's just so depressing to do tank coaching. It's so sad to do tank coaching because it's better to chill in neutral. It's always better to chill in neutral unless you've got a significant advantage. Like, you look through the permutation of it. So if I just go like this and I say resource and angles, and I say a resource advantage and an angle advantage, I should press forwards. Okay, let's do it like this. So I have a resource advantage and an angle disadvantage. I should push aside. If I have a resource disadvantage and an angle advantage, I should chill. And if I have resource disadvantage and angle disadvantage, I should chill. On all situations, apart from full advantage, I should just chill. What's the point? You ain't going anywhere. Chill. And I'm just here like, how do I tell people that you should just stop playing and wait? I tell people like complementary pressure, you gotta wait for your DPS, you gotta relax, but they get an advantage, they push like 5 minuscule steps too far, and you know what happens? They force too many resources and they lose because their supports are healing them and not the DPS, because the DPS matter more because the resource like trade is just not there. This is why the increasing health bars and decreasing the sustain just leads to static gameplay with like full swing pushes, right? This is it. And this is a hard thing to explain to people, and this is the bit that the 5v5ers will never accept. This is it. Why Overwatch is currently boring. This is why tanks hate their lives. It's the pressure of always having to do nothing, and if you try and do something, you are feeding. You should AFK. If you don't AFK, you're done. If you wait and hold the position, you keep that position. But that was the thing, right? We're holding high. We are advantage in terms of angles, right? We are even in terms of resources, okay? So advantage in terms of angles, even in terms of resources. So what's the correct thing to do here? We chill here, we don't aggress. I was coaching Frostflame the other day on tank. He was on Winston, he was playing on high. He traded for the backline, and I was like, yeah, that's a misplay. The Winston's not allowed to jump into the enemy backline because there's no extra tank to stabilize the high ground. They're going to lose the high ground to a trade, and you've thrown it into chaos when you could have had a stable position. There's no, I pick Bull with Sigma and we still have a stable position and I get to lightly pressure. You either get to stabilize the high ground or you don't. And so that's just so awful. The fact that no character really wants to aggress onto low ground there, even the dive characters, even Bull, right? Even Bull. Imagine you're playing this, you have the advantage position and you're playing Bull, and the enemy team's not got Farah, maybe they've got the Tracer, maybe they're trying to go up here. You shouldn't try and catch their rotation. You should just fucking chill up here, roll off the corner, and then slam back on. So tanks are more like an anchor? Yeah, when you're advantage, tanks are more like an anchor. When you're even, tanks do nothing because doing something is bad. And when you're disadvantaged, then maybe you can do something if it's just an angular disadvantage, because the stuff that you'll do to take away the angles and the resources you demand can be worth it. So we're chilling, right? We got Hollywood high. Yeah, sure, I'll swing in and I'll slam. If they're jumping at exactly the same time as I swing in and slam, and I don't catch them before the jump, I'm like, should I just stay here and counter slam with Bull? What's the point of aggressing? Why don't we just chill and anchor like every single time? Incentivizing players to have static playstyles is awful. And that's the problem with Overwatch 2 and 5v5. That's the real problem at the base. More to hog, flank and kill. But I know you're kidding. Because the correct strategy on a hog, you know, I know. Stand on high ground, wait for the enemy team to jump at it, root it, anchor it. We come from here, we go left, we put down a shield as ram, we do a little bit of poke, we chill out, or we go behind here. Anything more we do is feeding. Maybe we can see. Maybe we can see in a match. And do you know the thing is? The characters that people don't want to play against, the Orisa, the Mauga, that sort of person. Do you know why people like Orisa, Mauga, and that sort of person? It's because they are the only characters that are allowed to aggress. They're the only characters in a neutral fight with no angle support that can actually do anything aggressive that is good to do something aggressive on, because they demand so little resources that you can. Or they have so much of an advantage by aggressing that they can. So like this from the Orisa, they're allowed to press W. Nobody else is. You play Ram in this scenario, you press W past here, you should be firing a Vortex and poking and chilling and relaxing and then peeling for the Winston. And I'm just going through the game and I'm just, why am I doing tank coaching when there is nothing to coach? When there is no information here, when the answer is always chill out until you've got a significant advantage that somebody else creates. Can we watch Ralph feed on Lucio? Sure. And it's just, it's hard. Because I watch Spylo's coaching, and I watch all coaching, and I'm sitting there like, you're just telling them to play a more boring style of gameplay. I watched like 2 videos of Spylo today doing coaching on Ramantra. Like I watched like a Masters one to GM one, and I watched like a Mid Diamond. And both times I was there, sitting there like, well, he's just too aggressive. He should just chill. And it's like, how do we end up here in a situation where the correct thing is to just hold block and relax and hold block and relax, and you never aggress with your form, because if you aggress with your form, you can't hold block later, and you demand resources, and that's bad. Like, how do we get here? I don't know, dude. I just find it hard. Hopefully somebody else cares to empathize with me. Just hold block then shield, then block then shield. Yeah, occasionally Vortex somebody if you think you can get a kill, right? And then Spylo's sitting there and he's like, well, sir, I know the issue. You didn't walk to the high ground, which was objectively right. And I'm like, they fucking know they should have walked to the high ground. Like, they're a master player. And if you try and make a play now as Queen, etc., everything about it tells you to charge forward into a group of enemies. You can't finish kills unless DPS are applying their pressure. Feels bad. I feel like Queen suffers the least from all of this because her pressure is so pinpoint and instant that essentially you can apply that pressure without contributing to being like burned down. Like if you go back to this, right, this stuff here, Queen's like mid-range for that and mid-range for that, which means that Queen doesn't really demand too many resources, so you can at least carnage without blowing yourself up or demanding so many that the DPS aren't worth it. But Queen has low mobility. So what are we talking about? If we're in any angular advantage position, Queen will still want to play neutral and just chill on the high ground and root the position, because that's the correct thing to do. It will always be the correct thing to do. It's hard. It's hard. Is this Ralphio gameplay going well for you guys? Okay, we need to lighten up a bit, right? I'd like to apologize that this whole tank thing turned into a bit of a doomer post. Because quite frankly, I find it hard to talk about tank and the correct thing to do about tank without getting upset. And it's because I have devoted years of my life to actually helping people understand this game. And when I have to give advice of shut the fuck up and chill and don't do anything, I just hate it. And I don't know how Spylo does it. I don't know how he goes on and talks to diamond players daily and plat players and gold players daily and just tells you, well, stop fucking pressing your buttons, you idiot. Just don't do it. Go back to high ground, dummy.